talk at the end, yeah, after yours.
Ready? Okay, let's get started here. Today we're going to talk about unhinged. Unhitched and unhinged. I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I think it was, that Andy Stanley had mentioned in one of his sermons that we really need to unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament, which I think is very dangerous. Obviously. First, let me just housekeeping things. Saturday, all day Saturday. What time do we start? 9:30. Randy Smith and I are going to be doing a little prophecy conference, Bible conference about Israel. Randy's got 3 topics that he's going to talk on, and then I'm going to cover everything else in 1 hour. And I know nobody says, you're never going to speak just an hour. So we'll see. Let's see if my prophecy comes true. I think I can cover it in an hour. I'm still batting a number of ideas around in my head. As I prepared this week, it seemed like everything had slowed down a little bit in terms of what's happening. So then I decided, well, I'll just look at some of the intelligence and foreign policy materials that I look at. I'll read those and I'll just get up to speed and do a little bit of a deeper dive. And then it was very quickly clear that I had, again, way too much information to cover in the time that I have today, which I'm not predicting will be an hour, but it's possible. I read a lot. I looked at a lot of things. So let me just give you a couple of scripture verses to kind of set the stage. In Luke chapter 17, Jesus, talking to his disciples and the people around, said this, "And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, also as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all." In 2 Peter 2, it talks about Lot and delivered just Lot. Peter's talking about judgment, and delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. For that righteous man, dwelling among them and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. The Lord knoweth how to deliver the godly out of temptations, and to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be punished. Sometimes when you look through the news a lot, and I'm sure you have this feeling too, you'll turn on a TV station, you'll turn on the news, especially some of the major mainstream news outlets like CNN and MSNBC and even Fox from time to time. And you wonder, have I lost touch with reality? The world doesn't seem real anymore. And then every now and then you come across an article, an editorial that does confirm that, yes, indeed, you are still engaged in a real world and things are just like you say. And so to my sort of anchor this morning, that I was still in touch with reality, was Maureen Dowd's editorial in the New York Times that Obama was just too good for us. Because I always thought she was kind of crazy, so I still know she still is, right? And when you see this happen, you begin to understand that the world will fall for it, for a world leader. Unless they're saved, unless they have Jesus. That's the only defense that people will have. Otherwise, they'll fall for it. And Scripture even hints that, if that the elect could be deceived as well. There'll be lying signs and wonders. And there's this disconnect that you see everywhere. People who claim to name the name of Christ. I'll give you an example. Jesse Duplantis. I'm sure you saw the articles this week that he was out. He's a word faith evangelist, and I put evangelist with him in scare quotes, and I really mean the scare quotes. Don't pay attention to this guy. Don't listen to him. He's a false teacher. And so he said that God told him that the church was supposed to give him, his church, $54 million so he could buy a better jet. He already has 3. Now, when I hear someone like that say, God told me thus and so, and then it's usually something to elevate themselves or for you to give them money, I want to say, well, God's telling me you're a nut. So do they cancel each other out? I hope so. But people will give their money to this guy. There's a video out there, I didn't have time to pull out the clip, of Kenneth Copeland, who's big pushing the Pope's agenda. All religions are unite all Christians under the same banner because it's all the same. And I'm going to show you somebody else who says this too later in my talk today. And Kenneth Copeland and Jesse Duplantis are there, and they're talking about how Kenneth has many jets. Jesse, this will be his 4th. And they need it because why? Because it's important for them to be able to get someplace without stopping. They need a bigger jet because they don't want to stop and refuel. So they can get somewhere to what? Share the gospel. Then Kenneth Copeland says, and this guy really bothers me. I tried a lawsuit in Fort Worth 20-some years ago, and I saw the people coming to his pastors and leaders conferences, and it made me even more frightened of him than I was before, or concerned about him. And Kenneth Copeland says to Jesse in their little conversation, yeah, man, you get on a plane, all those drug addicts and those people are demonic you got to sit next to. So wait a minute, Ken, you need a jet to go share the gospel, but you can't sit next to somebody on the plane and do it? You're a fraud. You're an abject, it's so clear what this man is, it's not even funny. We see all sorts of things. I'm going to talk a little bit about some concerns I have with the church. Here's a large United Methodist Church. Church of the I think it's the largest United Methodist Church in the United States. Their attendance runs 15 to 20,000 on a Sunday. And they had a Ramadan dinner this week. Great turnout for the Ramadan dinner last night. We enjoyed sharing a meal and conversation with our Muslim brothers and sisters. Thank you to the Dialogue Institute of Kansas City. Now that's interesting because you know what's going on here is this Hegelian dialectic. We'll sit down and talk and we'll come to some kind of common ground. Linda Sarsour this week, she was very upset with President Trump and his immigration policy, so she tweeted, you know who she is, she's that Palestinian Brooklynite who runs around. She's a feminist, she's a Muslim, she's always got plenty to say. So she tweeted this picture about President Trump, children in cages because they're being separated from their parents for their Trump's immigration policies. If you come here illegally, he's going to send you home. And look at this. Look at the children in cages. Look at what President Trump is doing. You know what the problem with that picture is? It was taken in 2014 when the Obama who's too good for us was the president. They're all frauds, people. Look, I know they are. I'm just trying to warn you, and let you know what's going on. So that came from the Arizona Republic back in 2014. And so what happened was, boy, all the lefties that had tweeted that out were quickly deleting that from their Twitter account. But praise the Lord for whoever invented screen captures software. That's great. There's a conference coming up in St. Louis in July called the Revoice Conference. It has a number of fairly well-known evangelical people, leaders, I guess you would call them, who have endorsed this. And what's it about? Well, it's about revoice. Get people, it's all about pushing the acceptance of the LGBT agenda and being nice to them and not saying anything negative to them. So who are some of the endorsers? Francis Chan. Preston is one of the leading and trusted Christian voices when it comes to faith, sexuality, and gender. I wholeheartedly recommend that Christians learn from his work in this area. Megachurch pastor Matt Chandler. As I have tried to navigate faithfully the issues of sexuality in our day, Preston does the best job I have found explaining implications and applications of the scriptures on these issues. Gabe Lyons. He spoke at Grace Brethren National Conference when it was over here at the Polaris, probably 2008, 2009. Preston is one of the few Christians who can speak with authority, clarity, and compassion on issues related to sexuality and gender. I hope that many leaders listen to his voice. And here is they have a statement of faith, and it sounds pretty conventional, but they actually have a part of it called the Statement of Marriage, Sexuality, and Gender. And what's happening is this erosion of biblical standards with respect to marriage, sexuality, and gender, which it comes out, it's this social justice, neo-Marxism, Marxism approach, social justice. It's seeping into the church. I could go through and show you page after page from Sojourners. Jim Wallace, the Marxist Jim Wallace, claims to be an evangelical leader, promoting LGBT equality, same-sex marriage, all sorts of things. He comes to churches. He's been in churches here in Columbus and spoke. He's a Marxist. He doesn't hold to biblical Christianity. I think you'll see later in this what I'm talking about. Even the Gospel Coalition, that has guys like D.A. Carson, John Piper, a number of other people. This is what they tweeted this week. It is more masculine to be attracted to men, yet obedient to God, than attracted to women and disobedient to God. I know. Let me change that real quick here. There's a big article this week in I'm trying to remember where I picked this up. It talked about the abortion vote that took place in Ireland recently. and how both sides, both those that wanted to preserve, it was called Save the Eighth, it was the Eighth Amendment there that essentially banned abortion, and those that wanted to repeal it. And what they did, everybody was using social media, but the people that wanted to repeal it were very effective because one of the things that they did was storytelling. Look at what this article says. Such storytelling, undeterred by personal abuse, had an impact. An exit poll conducted by the Irish national broadcaster RTE showed that 43% of those surveyed said people's stories influenced their vote, while 34% cited the experience of someone they knew. What is this? This is postmodernism run amok. Stories, narrative, experience, and not truth. Ben Shapiro wrote an article about it called The Suicide of Europe. Great article, you should look it up. It was at, I think, CNS News. But here is the announcement that the 8th is going to be repealed. Here's just a little video that I found at The Independent in the UK. There's sound to this. Do they know what they're cheering for? I don't think they do. I don't think they understand. Let me give you an example. These are some statistics, and I talk about demographics from now and then. These are the age ranges of China. So you see here in 1979, younger at the bottom, older at the top. It's a pyramid, right? Okay, go to 2020. And what's happening? You're getting more people, the old people at the top are equaling or exceeding the people at the bottom, the young people. That's not, no culture, no country has ever recovered from that. It is historically unknown. This is true of all cultures in the West, for the most part. 2050, look, it's pretty much flat. And then you go out to 2080. Now, what does this have to do with abortion? Well, China enacted a policy a few decades back called the one-child policy. And if you were found pregnant and you already had a child, you were forced to have an abortion. And what's even the Chinese have figured out? That wasn't very good. They've moved away from that, but guess what? It's too late. It is too late. China isn't, listen to what this article says, China isn't alone in this challenge. South Korea, Japan, and a number of Western countries have comparably low fertility rates and shrinking aging populations. Every day in Japan, the world's oldest country, nearly 1,000 more people die than are born. But China is different in four main ways. First, this trend is happening faster in China than elsewhere. The slice of the Chinese population made up of retirees will jump from less than 10% to a full quarter in just 25 years. In Western countries, the shift has taken place more gradually, generally over a century or more. China will have far less time to adjust. Second, it's happening earlier on China's development curve than any other major economy. In other words, China is growing old before it grows rich. When Japan reached the percentage of retirees China has now, per capita incomes were double those of China today. When South Korea crossed this threshold, incomes were nearly 3 times as high. This meant more money to sink into elder care in aggregate, plus fewer one-child households left holding the bag. And even these countries are still struggling to cope with the rising social costs and economic stagnation tied to demographic decline. Third, at least compared to Western countries, China has never been particularly receptive to immigration. The U.S. ability to attract and absorb immigrants is an enduring source of national strength, occasional political spasms over the issue notwithstanding. China has no tradition of attracting foreign immigrants. That's why Japan has even less than China. Just 1,576 foreigners were granted permanent residency in China in 2016. Think about out of what? 1.4 billion. Is Jim Wallace going to China and marching? Speaking of a wall, China has a wall, right? We're going to talk about the wall a little bit later. Christ at the checkpoint. And it's unclear how the country's rigid systems of social control would adapt to a major influx of outsiders. Finally, China's political economic balance is far more precarious than that of more developed economies. The benefits of its economic rise have not been shared equally between the coast and the interior. So they have 1.4 billion people. At most, 300 million of those have participated in the economic growth. The rest, 1.1 billion people, 1.1 billion people, 3 times the number of people in the United States, live in some of the worst poverty on the planet. Making matters worse, here's the money quote. The one-child policy led to an explosion of gender-selective abortions, creating a sizable imbalance between the sexes. By 2014, there were 41 million more men than women in China, and this gap is widening. In other words, there will be tens of millions of males with poor chances of marrying and looking for an outlet to vent their frustrations. In fact, after it lifted the one-child policy in 2015, the government saw a wave of protests by couples demanding compensation for being denied the right to build a bigger family. The point is this. What those people in Ireland were cheering was the death of their society. Actions have consequences. You kill all your babies, or a large percentage of them, there won't be people around to take care of you when you get old. And your society will die. Europe is in death throes. China is. And look, everybody looks around right now and says, oh, look, everything's great. Economy's up. Trade, everything's going great. I'm just telling you, it's what I talked about last week. Under the surface, there's lava flowing. And it will erupt. And so this is why I think there's this convergence of things. And one of the things that converges in the end times is the demographics. China and India will, and listen, all of this will happen sooner than any of these models predict. This isn't going to happen by 2080. It's going to happen much quicker, more quickly. Much more quickly. So Russia has this problem. They have a low birth rate. Spain has this problem. All of the countries of Europe have the problem. There's a couple places on earth where it doesn't seem to be a problem. Muslim countries, Africa, and Orthodox Jews. If you've been to Israel and you've gone through the Orthodox neighborhoods, it's shocking. I mean, I think I shared this when we drove in a year ago when we were there. We drove through an Orthodox neighborhood, and in a 1 kilometer stretch along a main road, I didn't count, but I know I saw over 100 baby carriages and strollers on one street in the middle of the day. It was, and you go out to dinner, and every Orthodox couple had a baby. Not most of them, every single one. And this is starting to hit the Arab world too, and Palestinian birth rates are collapsing as well. Here's what Ben Shapiro said in his article, The Death of Europe. But at least the Europeans have their priorities straight. While it's perfectly legal to lock up a provocateur covering a trial involving Muslims, the European Union is now considering a ban on products like cotton buds, straws, and other plastics for fears of marine litter. And just as importantly, it is now perfectly legal to kill unborn children again in Ireland, where voters, with the help of the cheering press, decided to lift the ban on abortions until the 20th week, condemning thousands of children to death. This is how the West dies, with a tut-tut, not with a bang. The same civilization that sees it as a fundamental right to kill a child in the womb thinks it is utterly out of bounds to film outside a trial involving the abuse of children, so long as the defendants are radical Muslims. The Europeans have elevated the right not to be offended above the right to life. They've elevated the right not to be offended above the right to free speech, all in the name of some utopian vision of a society without standards, and this is how they will die. The world's going to give it one more big shot, because Mr. Big Shot's going to come on the scene that appears to have the answers. But this demographics, all of this stuff, it narrows the window in which all of this can happen. There's just no standards. This is from a conference that took place in late April at the Vatican. Unite to Cure, that's St. Peter's there on the cover, a global healthcare initiative. How science, technology, and 21st century medicine will impact culture and society. Fourth International Vatican Conference, Vatican City, April 26th to 28th, 2018. Pound Unite to Cure. And so, of course, they had all of these, you can go through the things there on the right about the things that they wanted to do. For example, about the fourth one down. Discuss the effect of emerging technologies and their anthropological, ethical, cultural, religious, and societal implications. So they had some moderators. And you would think, it's the Vatican, right? It's Roman Catholic Church headquarters. So the moderators are probably going to be theologians. So they had Max Gomez, Emmy-winning medical correspondent from CBS, Meredith Vieira, American journalist and talk show host, Sanjay Gupta, TV MD, and Mehmet Oz, The Oz Show. I think he's Pakistani or something. And I'm pretty sure he's Muslim. One of the sessions was on the third day, impacting children's health through meditation globally. Panelist, Katy Perry, American singer, and Bob Roth. So here, I just want you to see this. Now listen, she was raised in a home that was, she says her parents were traveling evangelists. They were there at this and they heard her say this. So here's just a 1-minute clip of this interview.
I knew that I had to take care of my mental health and my mind, which is, the greatest asset in my body besides my heart. And I knew I had to protect it. And so Bobby was able to teach me meditation in India. And the stillness that I found is beyond anything I've ever experienced. It's way different than napping. Everybody's like, well, I'll just nap for 2 hours, right? And this is totally different than napping. I said to you yesterday that napping is to brushing your teeth as flossing is to meditation.
When someone says to you...
Words are very powerful.
Pardon?
God created the world with words.
Yes.
So I was raised around the idea that our body is a temple. And I think if our body is truly a temple, we have to take care of it, mind, body, and soul. And this takes care of your mind. And I notice when I meditate that my whole brain kind of opens up. It feels like a halo is ignited around my head. And it's like I'm clearing out the cobwebs of my neural pathways and finding new neural pathways to ignite. And it's some of the most incredible stillness, and also, I would say it brings some of the best, most creative ideas to the surface for me, especially when I come out of it.
Okay, now listen. Pray that she gets saved. But the other concern is that what she talks about is being pushed on children in our schools, in corporations, through programs called mindfulness, and it's this meditation, stillness, contemplative prayer, whatever you want to call it. It's being pushed in evangelical colleges and seminaries under the spiritual formation program. And people are opening themselves up to really bad things by doing this. That's why Richard Foster, who's sort of the guru of contemplative prayer in modern terms in the so-called evangelical church, using the scare quotes again, and so scare quotes, he says when you engage in this, before you do it, you need to pray prayers of protection. It's in one of his books. Now, when Jesus said to the disciples, pray like this, did he say pray a prayer of protection? Foster says you're going to encounter dark beings, demonic forces. Does this sound even remotely like biblical prayer? But people are pushing this on evangelical colleges and universities like there's nothing wrong with it. And there is. It's not even remotely biblical. It's another religion. Europe is really in bad shape. Where to start with Europe? Economically, they're having major problems. They're very concerned about the Iran deal going away because they had big contracts with Iran. That's why they're pushing to save it. Here's Der Spiegel has a headline, Ciao Amore. And the translation of the phrase below it is, by love, Italy destroys itself and tears apart Europe with it. Another magazine from Germany, Mamma Mia, shows Italy going off the cliff. Now, what happened in the election was that there were populist parties that won. And so the populist parties won the green. The more mainstream parties won the blue, which means they won Rome and Milan, I think. But because that's where the major population is, it's not too dissimilar from the U.S. map in the last election, right? And everybody's upset because these populist parties now appear to have been able to form a coalition, and they're going to take over the government. Italy populists form governing coalition. At the same time in Spain, Spain's prime minister has been ousted following a corruption scandal. So Spain's government is in a state of turmoil. Italy, two of the major economies in Europe. It's all crumbling. And so this graphic of the cracks appearing in the European Union I think is appropriate. Now, where does this go? I mean, does this mean that a strong man's going to come to power? And, this is all a possibility. It's something to pay attention to. Because somebody's going to come on that appears to have all the answers. And this is going to be, I think, global as well. Let's talk a little bit about Syria. Some things going on in the Middle East. This is a picture of one of the streets in Marmuk. And when they say they destroyed virtually every residence in the Palestinian refugee camp within the city of Damascus known as Yarmouk. The Marmuk was that big dog, right? Yarmouk, Marmaduke, okay. I forgot he was royalty, okay. And I have my editor back there in the last room, and happy 43rd anniversary this week to her and me. And if you want to see, I shared a Facebook post about I'll put it in scare quotes, proposal. You can read that. So it's a little bit confusing because things are changing day by day. So I mentioned this last week. Netanyahu went to Russia. That was followed by a meeting in Sochi, Russia, with Assad and Putin. And it appears that what came out of that was, okay, you guys, we want all foreign troops, that's what Putin said, we want all foreign troops to withdraw from southern Syria. And that includes Americans and Turkey and Hezbollah and Iran. And the Iranians got pretty upset about that. So there was a lot of controversy about that. It's led to a lot of tension between Iran and Russia over what Putin actually meant. The Iranians are saying, we're not going anywhere. We have a lot of investment here. By some estimates, they've invested over $100 billion in Syria over the past 7 years. They're just not going to walk away from that. Assad gave an interview on RT, Russia Today, and he said, well, yeah, they have some advisors here, but they don't have any troops. Which, I mean, I just don't believe much of anything that Assad says. At the same time, there's rockets are flying from Gaza into southern Israel. Iron Dome takes out some. The jets go in. They destroy some. They found I think it was about a 2-kilometer long tunnel that Hamas had put all this money, all these contributions and materials that come in. They build these tunnels. They have air conditioning, electricity. They claim their sewage system isn't working. I suspect it's not working in part because they're taking the water pipes and everything and cutting them up to use as mortar shells, as the basis for mortar shells. It appears that some of the things found, these mortar shells came from Iran. And Israel's dealing with it. It's just a problem. But listen, there's a couple million people there. And if a couple million people all rush the border, there's going to be it'll be a huge problem. Now, whether they'll do that or not, I don't know. Netanyahu says, we'll hit Iran anywhere in Syria. We don't want you there at all, anywhere. Gaza seems to have calmed down. Egypt kind of came in. But, I wouldn't call it an annoyance that these rockets fly into Israel. I mean, one hit a kindergarten. Fortunately, there was nobody there when it happened. Jonathan Spire has a great article in Foreign Policy. I think I mentioned this last week briefly. Putin's endgame in Syria has arrived. Syria increasingly seems to be moving toward de facto partition, accompanied by an ongoing low-level military conflict and a functional but sluggish politics, a so-called frozen conflict. Inspire writes some of the best stuff on this conflict that I've seen. This may have been the goal all along for Russian President Vladimir Putin. I was looking at some Russian, how to pronounce Vladimir, I think that's how you say it. Anyway, Putin, who has initiated and managed such conflicts elsewhere, including in Georgia and Ukraine. Other significant players in Syria, including Israel, the United States, Turkey, and the remaining Sunni Arab rebels, may likewise discover they'd be satisfied with this new reality. The clearest losers, by contrast, would be the Assad regime and Iran. And Jonathan Spire cites to this article from the Middle East Center for Reporting and Analysis, Fractures in the Alliance Post-ISIS Syria. It's a very interesting article. You should look it up and read it. Arab media has been reporting that tensions between the Iranians and the Russians are coming to the surface. Bashar, and I think I talked about this a long time ago, that Putin had some goals when he went into Syria. He wanted a warm water port or two and a base in the Middle East, so he could use it as a place to project power. I don't think he was particularly interested in getting involved in a big, long war, and it's drug out far longer, I think, than he thought. Now it appears that he's been able to get to the place, well, maybe we can pull back a little bit. So Arab media has been reporting that tensions between the Iranians and the Russians are coming to the surface. Bashar al-Assad made a surprise visit to Sochi in which he told Vladimir Putin he accepted the need to send a delegation to the UN to form a committee to redraft the Syrian constitution, something which he had previously opposed. In the press conference which followed the meeting, Assad said, essentially, we've focused on forming a committee to discuss amending the constitution arising from the Sochi conference. It will begin its work participating with the United Nations. Myself and President Putin have agreed that Syria will send the names of its delegates to the committee. And it's a very, very long article. And it talked about this conflict that had arisen, like, okay, are we getting out of Syria? And Iran came out and said, we're not leaving. You couldn't have meant us. Here's a quote from the article. The reports state that the rift centers around Russia's desire to reach an arrangement with the United States, Jordan, and Israel in southern Syria. This arrangement involves the opening of the Nasib border crossing with Jordan, avoiding military clashes in the south, the withdrawal of heavy weaponry and Iranian-backed militias, such as Lebanese Hezbollah, 25 kilometers from the Syria's southern border, and for the Free Syrian Army to fight al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates in the south of the country. Iran, on the other hand, has been pushing Damascus to let it move into and take territory in the southwest of the country. It calculates that this would then enable it to form a military deterrence against Israel in case there's a buildup of clashes on the border area. Russia considers this to be a reckless step fraught with danger, as Israel will take steps it considers necessary to prevent the Iranians gaining a foothold in Syria. It's worth noting that Russia has done nothing to prevent Israel from striking the targets. Moscow is now making clear that its interests don't entirely overlap with Assad's. In fact, when Putin came in, the articles that were written at the time said, you know, Putin's a great savior of Syria. He's going to come in. There's going to be this great alliance between Iran, Iraq, Assad, Syria, Hezbollah, and Russia. And today, that hasn't happened. But Putin evidently has little interest in the job Alamin, the pro-Hezbollah editor, wanted to offer him, leader of the region's militant Shiite bloc. Rather, Moscow wishes to make itself the key power broker in the Syrian context, the address through which all must pass in pursuit of their goals. What does that mean? Show me the money. You know, I want the contracts to rebuild Syria. I want the spoils. But for this, of course, Russia must be able to grant each party part of what it wants rather than coming down firmly on either side. Geopolitical Futures this week had a article on it. Iran, Russia, what's at stake in the Syrian civil war? And it talked about the fact that, you know, Iran really went in here because it wants to, its goal is to get Israel. Here's another part of that article. Russia and Iran's interests also diverge on oil. The government in Moscow relies heavily on oil and natural gas revenues, so any increase in the price of oil benefits Russia. Iran has a relatively low fiscal break-even point for producing oil. It can turn a profit when oil is roughly $55 to $65 per barrel, so it could afford to produce more to keep prices low. Now that the Iran nuclear deal is all but dead, uncertainty around Iranian production has driven up oil prices, giving Russia a little more breathing room. In other words, sanctions on one U.S. enemy, Iran, benefit another. Then there's Israel, with which Russia has friendly relations. This is from Geopolitical Futures. Iran's expansion has begun to invite attacks from Israel, which objects to having Iranian presence and so close to its northeastern border. While Russia is content to bomb rebels in Syria who have no real way to defend against air attacks, it is far more apprehensive about getting caught up in a war against a country with a powerful military and strong motivation to intervene. Israel's fight isn't with Russia, and Russia's isn't with Israel, but Russia and Iran's joint support of Assad nevertheless risks pitting Russia against a country it has no interest in fighting. And so if Russia is this leader of a coalition that comes against Israel, can you see how that's kind of setting itself up? Because it appears, I'll put hooks, not a hook, hooks in your jaw and I'll drag you in. That's what it says in Ezekiel chapter 38. They'll be reluctant, but they'll have no choice but to do that. It's an interesting thing. But Russia and Iran's joint support of Assad, I already read that. And then there was another article in, this is where they conclude. Russia's departure will put even more pressure on Iran and open the Middle East up to who? To Turkey. And then there's another article, Iran, this is from Foreign Policy just the other day, Iran wants to stay in Syria forever. Well, that's not a surprise if you read Bible prophecy. Here is, this is a map, a series of maps that Ralph Peters, you see him on Fox, you're used to see him on Fox News, put together when he was working in the security apparatus in the United States, sort of redrawing the map of the Middle East. And so this is, and by the way, this is the oil fields, the main oil fields in the Middle East. You see them up there around the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, and the Persian Gulf area, up into Iraq, into the Kurdish areas, all the way up into Syria and Turkey. That's the Kurdish areas up here right around, see if I can find my laser pointer. This is the Kurdish area right here. And then there's been some big battles around Dar al-Zor, which is up in this area, between Russia and the United States. That's where I mentioned a few months ago the United States had killed about 200 or 300 Russian mercenaries in that area. Peters proposed drafting a new map of the Middle East. See this, Free Kurdistan, Arab Shia state, New Persia, Sunni Iraq, Saudi homeland, independent territories, the Islamic sacred state, and there's the oil fields laid over the new map. Here's a map from a professor at Columbia University that has, you see all the black and red are oil or black, red is gas fields. And you can see, so this is like where all this conflict is taking place right now. Assad, this is an editorial cartoon from, I think, the Arab News. They don't like Assad, and what he's doing is he's taking over everybody's property. And are they going to let the Sunnis back in? At the same time, you have Hezbollah. Here's a good map from Geopolitical Futures about the rockets and where they can reach from Lebanon into Israel. And you see they have 9,000 rockets that could reach Ben Gurion Airport. That's a big deal. This was on the front page of the Jerusalem Post this morning. NATO chief says alliance won't aid Israel if Iran attacks. Is that a surprise? And they say, well, we have joint interests with Israel, but they're really not part of us. The Wall Street Journal yesterday had a fascinating article about a Middle East power struggle playing out on a new stage. And it's one that a lot of people don't think about. It's actually the area along the Red Sea, down here where you have to get past the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa up into the Red Sea to the Suez Canal, which is one of the most, and all these are conflict areas, South Sudan, Somalia, Yemen. People have bases all over the place, particularly there in Djibouti. We have some interest there in the United States. This is the front pages of Haaretz and Jerusalem Post this morning. U.S. utilizes a new UN strategy that puts Israel on the offensive. Now, I'm going to do two things. We should be done by 12:15. This is all part of this big kind of mix that you need to pay attention to. One of the things that's not talked about much, though, is Turkey and Erdogan. Now, listen, right now, Erdogan has called for elections in June. About 12% of the millionaires that were in Turkey a couple years ago have left because they don't like the way Putin is cracking down. He's become a really ruthless dictator. Back in July of 2018, they had a coup, whether it was staged or not. The result of that coup was was Erdogan came in and completely gutted his military, government, and educational establishment. That is why I believe that Turkey has been very friendly with Russia. They're natural enemies. Russia has to support Turkey because of this little thing called the Bosporus, through which the Russian army or Russian Navy has to go. Russia has really no effective year-round warm water ports. So here, this little tiny thing right here, if you put a big map of Russia up, they have a little place in the North Sea near the Baltic states. They have Vladivostok way over on the east coast of Russia. But that's a many day train ride from Moscow. They have really no ports. And so Erdogan controls the Bosporus, and he can make life very difficult for the Russian Navy. That's why, Russia came in and they took over the seaport here in the Crimean Peninsula. They wanted a port down here because they could use it year round. The other ports have a tendency in the winter, it's cold in Russia, especially in the north, and so the ports are not usable a large chunk of the year. So this is one of the reasons why Putin had come down into Syria, was to assure himself this. But at the same time, there are some things going on with Turkey. And this is very interesting. I did a lot of digging and research this week. One is open the floodgates. Turkey is building, particularly in the Kurdish areas, a number of very large dams. Part of this is to make it very difficult now they say, well, we need power, we're growing economy. Turkey's economy is the 17th largest on the planet in terms of countries. Iran, by the way, is 27th. So don't dismiss Turkey. And a lot of these areas that are mentioned, like in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Meshach, Tumal, Gomar, historically, those are all on that place that Turkey occupies today. And in biblical days, it was called Asia Minor, or in the Roman Empire time. And the Roman Empire, when it fell in Europe, it continued to exist in the area of Turkey for 1,000 more years. And then it was replaced by the Ottoman Empire. So I would not dismiss Turkey and its role in end-time Bible prophecy. And then here's one. Istanbulites to walk across Bosporus Strait through undersea tunnel in 2019. Erdogan is engaged in all of these big construction projects. Now, his economy right now is in shambles. The Turkish lira is falling, and there's a lot of unrest because of it, but he's engaged in these big projects to project power and to build himself up. He wants to be the head of the new caliphate, the Sultan. And he's doing everything to do that. This is something I did not know. This is the new airport for Istanbul. It is on the European side of the Bosporus. And when finished, it'll open in October, its first phase. But when finished, if everything was built, it would be the largest airport in the world. Did you know this? No. It's huge. The airport aims to challenge the Persian Gulf states vying to become the premier transit center for Eurasia, competing against Gulf hubs such as Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha. It also is designed to go against European hubs such as Amsterdam, Paris, Frankfurt, and London, all seeking to capture the growing transcontinental air traffic market, especially passengers traveling from the Far East and Australia to Europe and the Americas. And so here's another picture of conception of the airport. Here's the interior. The transit hall of the new airport is said to be shaped like the inlets of the Bosporus. The control tower resembles a tulip. Now, Pam and I had a conversation about this week. This is the new control tower, And I said, what do you think that is? And she said, I don't know. It's a control tower. But it's supposed to represent a tulip, because the tulip in Islamic icons in Islam, the tulip is representative of Allah. And Erdogan is pushing this Sunni caliphate, and he's doing everything to put it in place. And by the way, I was doing the research on this, okay, and I was driving home down Long Street, Spring Street there, and I saw this on the left. So I took a picture of it, and I messaged it to my wife, and I said, what is that? She goes, I don't know. Is there a plaque? I'm like, no, there's no plaque. I even parked illegally to find that out, my dear. And here's what it looks like from the side. I don't know what, it's some kind of flower. Does anybody know what that is? This is what passes for public art in Columbus, Ohio. Remember that monstrosity we used to have at the airport? Brush strokes in flight. Is that thing still there? Here's what else. So he builds this tulip-like control tower. He's building this huge mosque on the highest point in Istanbul. It will accommodate 37,000 worshipers at one time. Take that, Joel Osteen, huh? Kornike Hill, the highest point in Istanbul, 37,500 people. Okay, so pay attention to Erdogan and Turkey in all of this, because Iran's having problems. Their economy is in shambles. I saw a graphic this morning. Inflation is up like 70% in Iran. And the mullahs and the government there, the elites in power, they're very concerned about that. A lot of people don't like them being in Syria. But the mullahs are not going to change. So it's setting up this conflict, and I'm just suggesting to you, Daniel chapter 8 has a conflict between Persia and someone else that comes from the West. It could be Turkey. Turkey may take advantage of this. Turkey's moved down into Syria, and they've made it known. We want to move into Syria. How do we know that? Because they said, we want to move into Syria. Erdogan has had his government publish maps that show a further south border of Turkey, and he doesn't want to stop there. He wants to come down and reestablish the Ottoman Empire. So this week, I'll close with this. The rain is falling, so yeah, we need the rain. It's like hadn't rained since what, yesterday or Friday? I told Pam yesterday, I'm tired of cutting my lawn like every 4 days. Christ at the checkpoint. Now, Brian Schrager has an article that'll be coming out about how to deal with Christ at the checkpoint. I'll summarize it as he says, you got to attack these ideas on social media, in churches and talks and that type of thing, because these ideas are very problematic. I saw this, Lifeway did a survey that came out late last year that showed that younger evangelicals are wavering in the support for Israel. And some of the older people and the Southern Baptists and stuff that we're talking about, oh no, that's not true. It is true. Why? Because it's all based on feelings and experience. They cite in this article in the Wall Street Journal just the other day online that they cite a 21-year-old who goes to Liberty University and says, well, I think that this is really about human rights. A generational divide is opening up among evangelical Christians in the U.S. over an issue that had long been an article of faith, unwavering support for the state of Israel. The shift is part of a wider split within the evangelical movement, as younger evangelicals are also more likely to support same-sex marriage, tougher environmental laws, and other positions their parents spent a lifetime opposing. It's this social justice, Marxist stuff, and I'm telling you, it's gone through the colleges and seminaries, it's coming into the churches, and now people, I even saw a quote of Al Mohler where he was talking about, well, I've changed my mind about whether homosexuality is genetic. There's no research to support this. But he says he's changed his mind. And so even in the Gospel Coalition is just a wreck. Brandon House has been doing some great analysis on this. Thomas Littleton, another person that's been on Brandon's show a number of times. And this is coming in everywhere. Even the Israeli government is already grappling with the shift. The depth of the crisis hit us 3 years ago, said an Israeli tourism commissioner for North America. We realized we had to act now if we want to continue this bond with the faith-based community in the U.S. So even Israel notices that this is happening. Jackie Westernen, who just completed her junior year at Wheaton College, knew little about Israel before she went there during the summer of 2016 on a trip with a Palestinian nonprofit called Holy Land Trust. Well, what do you think she saw? That summer, she stayed for 2 months with a Palestinian Christian family in the West Bank. She saw the economic challenges in Bethlehem, she said, and the wall that separates the West Bank from Israel's territory. By the time that she returned to Wheaton, she was an advocate for Palestinian rights and sharply critical of Israel and Christians who cited the Bible to support U.S. current policies. The New Testament, I think, would be in favor of human rights. And I could read you Ezekiel 36. God will bring them back. He'll bring them back in unbelief. That is the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And then there's a terrible time coming called the time of Jacob's trouble. Jesus tells you when you see this event happen, flee, because there'll be a time like no other. But the prophecy is about the mountains of Israel and the people that occupied in the end in the conflict. Richard Mao, who was head of Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, California, wrote this article, "To my fellow evangelicals, what you're cheering in Jerusalem is shameful." You can find that at Religion News Service, along with a lot of other left-leaning neo-Marxist nonsense. Look what he says here. It's shameful, not only because they use their theology to make the moving of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem a matter of eternal significance, putting it in scare quotes, but also because they refuse to hold the Netanyahu government accountable for Israel's treatment of Palestinians, some of whom are among themselves evangelical Christians. And that's true. There are evangelical Christians. There are Christians in Israel. In Israel and in the area of Judea and Samaria. And he says, if you're going to send me angry messages, go ahead. I want to hear you. So I'm going to play a couple clips from Christ at the Checkpoint. Hopefully next week I'm going to have Brian Schrager. We'll do a little live interview with him. You can look up his article. Be sure you follow the Heim Report. But I want you to, so there were, hundreds of people that showed up at this conference. And one of the news organizations that showed up was True News. I want you to listen to just a little bit of this as True News talks about this conference, Christ at the Checkpoint in Bethlehem.
You know, guys, I spent my early morning hours just reading the Bible. And so I found a nice shaded place outside the hotel, and I sat there for a couple hours this morning reading from the book of Romans and other scriptures, and a very calm, peaceful morning. There were only two noises that disturbed the peacefulness of Bethlehem this morning. Number one, the Islamic call from the mosque, which is on loudspeakers. Yes. Mm-hmm. All right. Number two, the roar of Israeli military jets.
Right.
Okay. So I was sitting there thinking, Doc, those two are the agitators here.
That's right.
And if those two would go away, this would be a really peaceful place to be.
Yes.
A serene place.
It's
a harmonious place.
It is. This would be serene. It's peaceful. But you have those two agitators. You have the Islamic mosque, and you have the Israeli military.
Yes.
And so they're always clashing. It's two spirits of Antichrist. Two is like Antichrist coin, both sides of two sides of the coin. It's still the same spirit.
And the battle over the souls of the people here.
That's right. And so it's the body of Christ here in Bethlehem and the Palestinian territories that are still holding on to the gospel that their ancestors received 2,000 years ago.
Yes, isn't that amazing?
When the angels sang right over here, Doc. It
the
blows
shepherds.
my mind.
Their ancestors saw miracles.
Yes.
And I would have passed that on. If you think about that, your great grandfather witnessed
Yes.
Jesus walking through the garden, healing the sick.
My wife told me I had to maybe Katy Perry was right. I should. Don't pull that clip out, please. I don't believe she was right. She's wrong. She's wrong. The ignorance that was displayed by Rick Wiles was shocking. He talked about the people, the Palestinian Arabs in Bethlehem today are descendants of the shepherds in the field. And Bethlehem is in Palestine. Now look, I could open the book of Matthew, and the interesting thing about it is I listen to these rants that he goes on. He goes on talking about the Jews and empire. Where's he going with that? He can explain himself what he means. What I think he means is that the Jews want to take over the world. We know a Jew will rule the world, named Jesus, who will return as king. But there went out a decree, it says in Luke, from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And where was Bethlehem according to the Bible? Judea. There was no Palestine. And he went, oh, Palestine, this conference is great. They've got a Bible college. They're preaching the gospel. And he goes on to talk about, this is great because all the Christians can come together. The Catholics, the Orthodox, all these other people. We're all the same. Need to stop all this division. We need to be unified. Well, here was what a version of the gospel that, I can't remember his name, is Isaac Munther, the academic dean at Bethlehem Bible College, and this was his talk at Christ at the Checkpoint.
Belief system. I want to go to John 14:6, which I just read, where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except through me. See, when Jesus said, I am the way, I believe he meant more than simply believe in me and as the only way of salvation. I do not believe that Jesus meant this to be a dogmatic statement that has actually become a divisive statement. It is not as if he meant to say Christianity is right and all other religions as false. When he said, I am the way, I believe he probably meant my way, the sacrificial love way, is the way to God. Jesus is the way. His sacrificial way of love is the way to God. The way to God is the Jesus way. It is the way of love. It is by loving God and by loving neighbor that we are close to God. And Jesus models this. He embodies this. That's why he is the way.
So in other words, it's the suffering. This is the liberation theology narrative. This is Marxism. And this was supported by True News. Look, I will acknowledge at times True News, they say the right thing. What does our friend Jacob say? There's always real cheese in a rat trap. And so it's true. You got to be very careful what you listen to. Because what Dr. Isaac just gave you was a different gospel. A false gospel, an apostate gospel. So I'm gonna terminate my talk now, and we'll talk a little bit more next week about that with Brian Schrager. And look for his article. You can find it at Jerusalem Journal when it gets up, and I don't know if it'll be published in Jerusalem Post or someplace like some of them are. But I think it's important that you look at that and remember this is. I hope you grasp all these sort of complexities of things coming together. Now, things in some respect are a little bit on the calm side right now, but I believe beneath the surface, things are getting ready to erupt. We're seeing them erupt in Europe. We're seeing Turkey coming to the fore. And things could change very quickly. I mean, look, the elites in Italy had no idea that this populist coalition was going to come together. And Europe considers it a major crisis, both economically and politically. Because other countries they're afraid are going to go the same way when they have elections. So I want, so pray for us here at FBC. John, why don't you come on up? And John Dickey has a brief announcement to make about FBC and our facility. And then why don't you close in prayer and then we'll go.
Well, to keep this as short as I can, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm going to just read this announcement. And since many of our online viewers consider FBC to be their church, this announcement is being live streamed and will be uploaded on our YouTube channel as well. As a matter of fact, one day this week, I received a letter from an online viewer who said, we watch you every week and we consider you our long-distance church. After many, many months of prayer, the Elders, Facilities Committee, and Finance Committee are in agreement that it is time to begin a campaign to raise funds for a future full-time facility for FBC. We have always known that renting a facility on a Sunday-only basis is temporary, and renting from a governmental agency even more so. In March of this year, prior to the signing of a new rental agreement, we were informed that the board of this facility has been in the process of reviewing all of their activities in light of their mission to provide services to disabled individuals. Renting to outside organizations was one of those areas of review, and we were asked how much advance notice we would need if it was determined that the board would no longer rent the facility. We told them we would prefer a 1-year notice. Unfortunately, on May 24th, we were advised that as of December 31st, 2018, there would be no more short-term rental of these facilities. However, if we were still interested, the first floor and a portion of the lower level of the south wing would be made available to us to rent on a long-term basis, not less than 5 years. Some of you may recall that 3 years ago, they brought this up as a potential option for us, and then they took it off the table, and I think that was part of all this review. If we would decide to go that way, the cost of building out that facility would be at our expense, but we would recover that over the life of the lease by having a reduced rent. I'm going to give you a little bit of history of FBC's facility issues and the Lord's faithfulness over the last 5 years. In the beginning, on a Tuesday night, April 9th, 2013, a group from our former church came together to seek God's wisdom and guidance as to what He had in store for us. As the group that gathered for prayer was only a small portion of those who had left the former church, we specifically requested that if God wanted us to continue to gather together, He would need to provide us with a facility. One couple suggested to John Haller that he contact Tree of Life Christian Schools. The next morning, John contacted several of us to join him at Tree of Life in Upper Arlington to meet with their facilities manager and to tour the facility they had available to rent. It was beyond anything we could have imagined. It provided us with over a 100-seat auditorium, fully equipped with required AV equipment, a classroom for children's ministry, and a large storage closet. The next Sunday, April 14th, we began using this facility. Some months later, it was suggested that we take a look at this facility on Orange Road. And we visited the facility in mid-June. And we liked it very much, but we decided that since God had placed us at Tree of Life, we would stay there until it either no longer met our needs or until God decided to move us. Well, that didn't take too long. On September 16th, it was almost 3 years to the day, or 3 months to the day, we received a cease and desist order from the city of Upper Arlington effective immediately. John reviewed this with his law firm, and unless we wanted to spend the time and money to fight the city, there was little else we could do. We accepted this as a sign that God wanted us to move, and again, He provided immediately. On Tuesday, September 17th, we contacted the Delaware County Board and verified that both rooms 163 and 165 were still available to rent on Sunday, September 22nd. We met for worship as usual without any interruption to our weekly worship schedule. And here's another example how God has provided us with facility needs. In need of additional classrooms for the children's ministry and storage space on site, in March of 2015, we asked as to the availability of any additional space. We were even willing to pay 24/7 rent on a couple of rooms if that was necessary. We were informed, however, that there was no additional space available. But 2 weeks later, we were offered the use of rooms 17A, 17B, and 18 in the lower level for our children's ministry, and in addition, the storage room on this floor. And then a few months later, they offered us a storage room in the lower level for the children's ministry. We saw just God at work. I mean, from going to no space available to giving us exactly what we were looking for. Well, why do we need a full-time facility? Well, first, for continuity. We will never have to be concerned as to where we will be gathering for worship. It also would provide us with anytime access. It provides for special occasion and events such as baptisms, funerals, weddings, etc. It will eliminate the need for the weekly setup and teardown that we go through every week and have been for 5 years now. It will also extend the life of our equipment, not to mention the life of our volunteers, who it wears thin after a while. How do we propose to raise the funds? Since FBC is committed to following the financial principles God has set forth in His Word, we will not follow the wisdom of the world by incurring any debt, either short or long term, nor will we ask for any pledges of future payments. Rather, we believe that it is scriptural to make the need known and then allow God to provide the necessary resources in His timing. We also believe that God usually, though not always, supplies the resources through His people. Therefore, we are going to fund the new facility solely with donations of cash or other assets. I want to give you 2 examples from scriptures. Now, these are excerpts from Exodus 35 and 36. And Moses spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, "This is the thing which the Lord commanded, saying, Take from among you an offering to the Lord. Whoever is of a willing heart, let him bring it as an offering to the Lord." And all the congregation of the children of Israel departed from the presence of Moses. Then everyone came whose heart was stirred, and everyone whose spirit was willing. And they brought the Lord's offering for the work of the tabernacle of meeting, for all its service, and for the holy garments. Then all the craftsmen who were doing all the work of the sanctuary came, each from the work he was doing. And they spoke to Moses, saying, "The people bring more than enough for the service of the work which the Lord commanded us to do." And then in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, in a little prequel to this, King David had been the one who wanted to build God's temple. But God told him because he was a man of war, he would not be the one to build his temple, but it would be his son, Solomon. And so David began accumulating the materials that Solomon would need. Now, 29, starting with verse 2. "Now, for the house," this is David speaking, "for the house of my God I have prepared with all my might, gold for things to be made of gold, silver for things of silver, bronze for things of bronze, iron for things of iron. Moreover, because I have set my affection on the house of my God, I have given to the house of my God over and above all that I have prepared for the holy house, my own special treasure of gold and silver. Who then is willing to consecrate himself this day to the Lord?" Then the leaders of the fathers' houses, leaders of the tribes of Israel, the captains of thousands and of hundreds, with the officers over the king's work, offered willingly. They gave for the work of the house of God, and whoever had precious stones gave them to the treasury of the house of the Lord, into the hand of Jehiel the Gershonite. Then the people rejoiced, for they had offered willingly, because with a loyal heart they had offered willingly to the Lord. And King David also rejoiced. And I want to point out in both those passages there's 2 or 3 important points. First of all, their gifts were to the Lord. That's important. if we recognize our gifts as being to the Lord and not to the church. They also gave with willing hearts. The Lord had stirred their hearts. When in Moses, the passage in Exodus, when all the people left, and then those whose hearts had been stirred came back to Moses with the gifts. So I think, they left, they sought the Lord's guidance, which is what we're asking you to do, and he stirred their hearts. What are the donations to the facilities fund to be used for? Well, first, the cost of acquiring a full-time facility, the cost of remodeling a facility to meet our needs, the cost of repairing or replacing capital items such as a parking lot, roof, electrical, and HVAC systems, the cost of furniture and fixtures such as tables, chairs, lighting, carpeting, appliances, and baptistry. In an emergency situation, such as being forced to leave our current facility and rent a full-time facility, to the extent that such rent would exceed our operating expenses, the facilities fund would be used to cover any shortfall, as well as the cost to remodel a 24/7 rental facility. Now, this is very important. Donations to the facilities fund are to be made with a willing heart and to be made over and above your regular giving. Please do not reallocate your giving to the facilities fund, because this may well result in a shortage of operating expenses. But be assured that any year in which we have a net operating profit, a substantial portion of it will be added to the facilities fund. Our goal financially is to raise between $1,200,000 and $1,500,000 over the next 3 to 5 years. Currently, we have over $294,000 available. This sum includes $1,000, which was previously designated for a facility, an additional $12,800, which the leadership had allocated towards furniture and fixtures for a future facility, and the rest is totally undesignated and unallocated funds. We will allocate $250,000 of this money to the facilities campaign, with the remaining $40,000 being kept in reserve as an emergency fund. We ask that all of you, including those of you who watch us on the internet, prayerfully seek the Lord's guidance as to whether or not and to what extent he would have you participate in this campaign for a full-time facility. Thank you. And let me pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you again for an opportunity you've given us to come together, to worship you, to magnify your name. Lord, you know our facilities' needs. You have been faithfully meeting them over the last 5 years. And Lord, we kind of struggle with the direction we should go as to whether to continue to pursue the South Wing here or another facility, but we know the deadline we're under, as do you. And we just seek your guidance and wisdom. Thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you.